So, welcome back to Servant Leadership Library, the podcast where we dive into the art of leading with purpose, serving with heart, and occasionally laughing through the chaos. I'm your host, Nicholas Paluco, and today we're tackling a topic that doesn't always make it to the boardroom agenda, but absolutely should: mental health in the workplace. Joining me is Scott Scrogin, a man with more credentials than a Swiss Army knife. He's an advocate, a speaker, a strategist, and a certified peer specialist who's on a mission to increase awareness, inspire action, and kick, the stigma to the curb. With over 30 years of experience navigating bipolar disorder, Scott brings in an inside-out perspective to mental health, and that's as real as it gets. When he's not diving into strategic initiatives at ConnectWise or helping leaders refine success after the sale, Scott's busy collecting stories, delivering insights. So whether you're a business leader or an IT pro or just someone trying to keep your sanity intact, you're in the right place. Let's get started with Scott, shall we? So Scott, welcome to Servant Leadership Library. Tell us a little bit about your story, kind of what drove you to this passion and brought you kind of this connection into the mental health and the passion for the IT world. Give us a little insight on who you are.
Yeah, you bet. And first of all, Nick, thank you for having me here. I am passionate about the topic. I've had the pleasure of speaking now to about 1,800 partners over the last 2 years around the world. So it's really become something that is partners want to hear about, and partners most of them really want to know what they can do. I mean, if you're an owner, you want to help your leaders. If you're a leader, you want to help your direct reports, or you want to help your family. So it's certainly in the news more. From my standpoint, just kind of linearly, I was super fortunate when I grew up. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an architect. They were involved in everything I did. I was, I was fortunate. I was, as I tell people, kind of the kid you love to hate because I was the 4.0 student. I was the valedictorian of high school. I got the engineering degree.
Oh my.
I played basketball in college. I was a school mascot. I dated the cheerleader. I decided I want to go on to get my MBA because, of course, at that level, getting an engineering degree was not enough. So I applied to all the MBA schools and I got into Harvard Business School.
Wow, congratulations.
Well, the story continues. So I go to Harvard Business School. I go to work for 2 years because that's what they wanted to do, is to defer to get work experience. It's like MSPs want to hire people with work experience before education in many cases. So I go and I'm there 2 months, and I can tell something's not right. I'm not sick with the flu, but I'm sick with something I didn't know at the time, which was depression. And I left Harvard. I moved back home. I'm living with my parents. And obviously that was a big shock to my system. In general, people talk about depression being what they experience when they have regrets of the past, and anxiety being the challenges that they have about unanticipated things in the future. So in that case, I was really dealing with depression. I worked my way out of that. By working my way out, I meant I was finally able to get out of bed, and I was able to go to a doctor who provided me with some medication. I got better, but the flip side of that was I shot right above, if you want to think of it like like the sine wave, I shot right above, quote, normal into a bipolar episode. And for those of you not aware with bipolar episodes, it comes with, a lot of rapid talking, big ideas, travel, spending, all those types of things, not caring about relationships because what you want trumps everything else. So that was a period of time when eventually what had to happen legally was I had to be committed to the state mental hospital in Kansas. And again, that's a big delta between sitting in Cambridge at Harvard Business School and sitting in a room by yourself in a hospitalized setting. So I got out and I was in and out of jobs because we were working through medications. I still was dealing with some struggles, but eventually I was fortunate enough to get connected with uh, a person in the hometown that I grew up who was actually a friend of our family's. He owned at the time a VAR. He was on my church basketball team with my
Really?
dad. I barely knew him. And he's kind of like, hey, this guy actually has an email address on, this is how far back it was. He's got an email address on his resume and nobody else does.
Oh, Lord. Wow.
He must know something about the internet. So he's like, come on board. You can do some marketing stuff for us. And, I came on board and, that was in 1994. And I worked there for 12 years, got married. And at the time I was there, we did our ConnectWise implementation,
Okay.
like 200 people, they say they were in the first 50.
Yeah.
But Arnie came and did our implementation. I hit it off with him to the degree that he said, hey, how about coming to ConnectWise and being our COO?
Wow. Really?
So now keep in mind, that's when ConnectWise had about 75 people.
Right.
So I moved to my wife and I moved to Tampa, get a place to live. And unfortunately, I have another bipolar episode.
Mm.
And as my wife refers to it as vacation with furniture, we leave Tampa. And the reason we left was as soon as I exited ConnectWise, Arlen called. And he said, hey, I've got this idea for HTG peer groups. We're getting some interest. He'd known me because while I was with the VAR, we'd built the first product that ever integrated with ConnectWise PSA.
Really?
And it was an anti-spam, antivirus email firewall. You could actually go into the tabs in PSA and you could click and it would show how many emails had flowed through your system, how many were spam, how many were viruses. It was back to the days of like Postini and Barracuda and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, long story long, I end up leaving ConnectWise, working with Arlen for another 12 years to grow HTG, eventually selling it, ironically, to ConnectWise.
You can't get away.
So now I'm back with ConnectWise. And, I laugh, but at the same time, it wasn't all that funny because now I got to face the stigma of dealing with a lot of people who had seen me in a similar situation, not a lot, but some 12 years ago. And in most cases, the worst thoughts about situations you have are always in your own mind.
Right.
As I say, other people have their own problems and they actually don't spend that much time thinking about yours. So you're the one that gets to deal with that. Again, I'm at ConnectWise. Unfortunately, kind of bringing this to a close, I'm at ConnectWise and my dad gets ill and he had diabetes, which in many cases is a self-care, self-health, if you want to look at the broader picture of total health. And he passes away. And, I'm in the spirit of, hey, things are going to be, okay, I'm not going to let that get me down again into another depression. And shortly thereafter, my mother takes her life by suicide.
Oh, Lord.
And I'm able to, go through just a little over 3 years ago, just a little bit of the grieving process there. I still deal with that like anybody would.
Yeah, right.
But, with Arlen and the team at ConnectWise and my wife and friends and family, I'm, as I say, up and to the right, which is where you want your chart to go.
Yeah.
And that's what really drove me to, want to give back. To, share the message, to speak to others, to help them in however I could.
Right.
So that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow. What a journey. And that's a lot to go through with one person. And I think the grace of God has been bestowed uh, a mission for you. It sounds like, and a purpose. Um, and what an ability to be able to work through that. I know personally, working through situations with bipolar in my family and whatnot. If you're not close to that or you don't understand it, you don't understand how to kind of detach from the action of what's happening compared to kind of what grip it has on an individual as they work
Yeah.
through it. And
Yeah.
I had a father going through it as a child. Tell me, hey, I don't care what happens to you. Like, go jump off a bridge, right? And he was in a bit of a mode of kind of coming off of a high, right? Like, I say that proverbially, not like literally.
Mm-hmm.
And you really had to separate that, and you really had to understand. For me, kind of faith played a big part of, trying to center that. But
Yeah.
that is an enormous journey, or almost a lot to carry. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot to carry.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I've been
as
fortunate. I've been fortunate to have the, great people around me. I don't pretend to say I handled it all that well. There were times when, I've been in hospitals. I may mention the one, but from, New York City to San Francisco, from Tampa to Kansas to where I am now. I live in Omaha, and you learn something incrementally every time. And the
right.
biggest takeaway I had from a hospitalization that I had was really that, I thought that I'm really, I had a history of being so smart, always being the achiever. One of the
Yeah.
takeaways I had was I was climbing the corporate ladder and making great progress, really only to find out that it was leaning against the wrong wall.
Mm.
And I still, one thing I didn't mention was I went back, went to Wichita State, but I went back to get my MBA. And that was big, doesn't seem like as much, but that was a big
Yeah.
accomplishment.
Well, I mean, the
So,
empowering part is, and the motivating part, just hearing you, is you never give up. Like,
yeah,
you keep going. Like, you have all the opportunity to say, hey, I'm gonna quit this climbing this ladder, but you're giving us all inspiration that you don't quit, right? You center I'm
yeah,
hearing you say you center yourself around really good people. It sounds like.
yeah, yeah. I've been fortunate, Arlen Sorensen being Arlen, my wife, being the top two, as well as
Yeah.
I had the dean of engineering at Kansas State. I worked at Kansas State where I went to college. 2 times took me back after having bipolar episodes, and was
Wow.
just my hero, one who didn't turn his back.
Right.
Because blind people can. Again, they just don't care that much. And out of fairness, I've seen people in a similar situation and haven't taken the time to reach out to them or slow down enough to
Right.
really understand their challenge. So I'm not judging others. I'm just making observations. And that was one of the reasons I think in my case, one of the first things I did was I took a course. It's a 1-day course called Mental Health First Aid, and
Mm.
it's came from Australia, but it's a lot like the CPR type first aid course, and
Yeah.
anybody can take it. Most cities have teams of these individuals that can come in and sometimes even put it on in their business. But I would encourage every business to have one person who's been through this program. The next
Mm.
thing that I did was to take a licensed program through the state, and this is offered nationally,
Wow.
called the Certified Peer Support Specialist.
Okay.
And that's somewhat an ironic name for people like you and I who know peer groups
Yeah.
well, because I looked at it for years. I've been involved with peer groups now for over 20 years, and I always thought I was a certified peer support specialist. I was just going into groups and helping them improve their services gross margin or their marketing programs or their EBITDA or whatever the case could be. But this is actually a program that licenses you to help people who are struggling with mental health. And from my standpoint, it wasn't a case, the danger to me wasn't, injecting a drug into my veins or looking at the
Right.
bottom, for the umpteenth time of a cocktail. It was the big entrepreneurial idea. That
Mm.
was my motivation. It was taking my engineering degree and my
Wow.
business interest, and the high level of motivation. And that was my drug. And once I realized that, I was always one who would say those other people are in recovery. They
Mm.
are sick. I'm not. And
Mm.
what I had to get through was the idea that I am in recovery. I can fall off the bandwagon,
Right.
so to speak, just like they can. And every day is a new day. I have to, I don't go to AA. There are programs clearly for people that are bipolar, but I'm so blessed to be able to do the things that I've done while being bipolar, because the majority of people that are bipolar, who you've experienced this, I'm sorry to hear that, as you know, as I do, whether it's PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, any of the major mental illnesses, in so many cases can't.
Right. And or if they're alone, I think it's really difficult. I think a couple of things I picked up from you, even from my personal experiences as we dig into this and learn how to try to help others, is kind of the words mean a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like in my life growing up, there was people around my father and my sister who were struggling with this, and their comment was, "Well, you have a problem." Well, we all have
Yeah.
problems, but that can really hurt an individual and really create a barrier, which I really sticks with me over and over again. Because I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, we are all struggling with something. Are we humbled enough to be able to work through that? And we can only change ourselves, right? We can't change anyone else, but we can give guidance and support, and recognize that. From your experience and from like leaders that are also listening from that perspective, how do you recognize, or what do you think are kind of key components to helping recognize maybe some of these things in an employee, and how do you guide them through that, right? This isn't like a normal, we have an issue with vacation, right? We got to talk about
Yeah.
PTO, right? It has a lot of there's a lot of emotion probably behind that.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I think that, in general, when I give presentations or I worked with CompTIA to build resources for the first time ever into the
wow.
CompTIA website, and anybody who goes to CompTIA can go under resources and you'll find these mental health resources, but they tend to fork down one of two paths, right? You have the owner slash leadership team, and then you have the employee slash individual contributor path.
Mm.
Things that anyone can do and things that you'd want to do, if you're an owner leader. And I think that,
Okay.
I mean, you're right. There are highly, emotional, historical situations involved. And I've been reading a really good book on this topic called Unstressable.
Really.
And the idea being that what we want to build are not, we want to build humans that are unstressable, not just
Right.
less stress, but we want to build resiliency, grit. We want to build a framework, if you will, for how to look at stress. And the interesting thing to me is, from a technical standpoint of people who might be watching uh, this podcast, would be it was written by a gentleman who was the former chief business officer at Google X,
Really.
an engineer. And his previous book was called Designing Happiness, or excuse me, Designing Happy. So you have Unstressable and Designing Happy, and they come at it both from a very design, literally a physics type perspective.
Mm.
And, just to give you one example there of, what people I think can take away is I use the example of, stress being, from an engineering perspective, force per
Mm.
unit area. So if I have my area and I have my force and those hit together, that doesn't hurt all that much because I'm able to spread this force over this much area. But if
Mm.
all of a sudden I grab this pen and I choose to stab it into my hand with the
Mm.
same force, and it's got a lot less area, I think I'm tough, but I'm not that tough, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of pain there. And if you take that into the human world, I mean, stress really is the sum of the challenges that we face divided by our ability to handle them.
That's well said.
So if we can take those, we have two choices, right? We can either reduce the challenges or manage the challenges, or we can, keep our ability the same, or we can expand our ability to handle them.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all kinds of tools. We can get into the ability to handle them can be a function of having a purpose. The people that are wandering aimlessly versus really know their purpose and what they need to do. People who are getting exercise in a positive way. In the last 6 months, I've gone from maybe a day of exercise a week to 5 days of exercise a week. Going to diet. People that I've always thought I ate pretty well, but now I've got a great app on my phone that's really nice because you literally take a picture of what you're eating and it does both the calorie and the macronutrient tracking for you. We're using AI. You've got, yeah, exactly. You've got sleep. 5 years ago, if you and I were talking about sleep, people would be like, why does sleep even matter? Think of the evolution and the understanding of data on the importance of sleep. Yep. So, there's those sorts of, I would view all of those really on the individual side of the ledger, if you will, of anything you or I or, your viewers could take advantage of. When you shift over to the owner leader side, then obviously you're making broader decisions based on the organization. Things like understanding the employee assistance program. I make that a common conversation. I can talk a little bit about kind of the framework that I use many times in my presentations, when I talk to owners, but just very simply, if I was to go to an MSP and talk to your L1, L2 techs, and I said, tell me about the mental health offerings in your company's EAP, I'm probably going to get the same kind of glossed over look like their customers get when they say and come out and throw 3-letter acronyms at them. Right? I mean, is mental health covered under your insurance? Do you get some number of visits to a therapist? Do you have an app that you can use and have calls with a coach or a therapist? How confidential is it? What is the copay on those types of things? That sort of discussion. Obviously, I think of it really as the, from a leader perspective, I'll tell you right now, the framework that I use when I try to talk to leaders and they say, I can't afford a lot of time, I can't afford a lot of expense here, I'm not that comfortable getting into this squishy area with my team. I know there's some stigma around it. I don't want to step on any toes. I'll just say 3 things. I'll say acknowledge, educate, and care. And
that third one's really important. Just to even bring out the caring aspect is really important.
You bet. And I will say in my presentation, as I start to wind down, I'll go, look, here's what I would do. Either in a one-on-one or that next all hands meeting, I would say, Nick and all colleagues, whoever's in the meeting, I would say, look, this can be a very stressful business that we're in. We have stressful roles. It may not be as stressful as being a first responder. They may at certain times be more stressful than a CPA or a banker or everybody has some stress, but we know that we are many times, especially cybersecurity related,
right,
in more than average stressful situations. Let's get that out on the table. Let's not hide that. Secondly, I as a leader want to educate my leaders and my team about the resources we have available and the response that we would take in the event that there was a situation that needed a response. Mm-hmm. We will spend days producing business continuity and disaster recovery plans for ourselves or for our customers. But if you ask, when I'm in my sessions, and I'll say, if that next phone call that came to you as a business owner said that somebody in your office was having a mental health episode, what would you do?
Right.
And the most common comment is called HR. And the most common reality, especially for smaller organizations, is the owner is HR.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this idea again that we have these resources, we've made this investment. I'm out of the office attending Evolve peer groups, but guess what? There's somebody in the office that knows, here's the FAQ. We've developed that. They know that if something happens, here's how we're going to respond. My leadership team knows that the bigger that I get, the multi-locations, we've all got a common response as to what's going to happen here. And
I think that is a wonderful area. I think one thing that I didn't realize is when we released our EAP program in regards to, we have a private session agency that does it. It's a separate piece intentionally for the mental health, and we pay for their sessions, and it's private. However, when we released it, we got a standing ovation in our staff meeting, and didn't realize the impact that you didn't realize of this as many years ago was really impactful. Just to have a conversation about that and bringing someone in to talk specifically about the AP on that, and they're posting signs on how to respond and how to talk about it, really gives a person a feeling of like security, right? Like as an owner, we're there also to protect our employees, and I think the mental health is really that as well, right? If we don't know how to, right? If you don't know how to do CPR, you may not be able to save that individual. But I think that's kind of what you're saying as well. I think it's and also helping that person know how to empower another person to attend. I think there's such a stigma of like, well, I was told that this is bad, so I shouldn't go and talk to anyone. Well, shoot, we go to peer groups, we go to coaches, we have a coach. We don't, I mean, it is different, but still you're talking to someone that can help you through a situation. And I think that stigma is such a frustrating sticking point, and a lot of people need encouraged to just care enough to encourage them to do it. And hearing you say that others feel like, well, I don't want to get too involved. Well, isn't our job to take care of the people that we manage and lead and take care of? I mean, this isn't like just a paycheck, right? Like they're with us more than any time. So that gets me a little fired up that they look at it as a checkbox almost, right?
Yeah.
If not healthy, how can you be productive?
I think that, I mean, you're right on, and things that I see happening, like, I guess it was Tuesday of this week, I had my 90-day kind of check-in with my therapist. And, I always think about that as, do I put that on my calendar for Outlook? And I guess our calendars are set up where you have to identify who can see your full calendar versus just see busy. But, do I put it on the calendar as therapist? If it was going to see my golf coach, I'd at least be proud to talk about it with other people, but it's not always, as common then again, there are PGA pros who are very glad, and sports psychologists and all that sort of thing that they go. I talk to people who, this is one of the tips, and again, it's not for everybody, but I know organizations that have a Teams channel that people will join and have conversations, not so much about my therapist appointment is at 9:00 Tuesday, but it may be, hey, here's a book or an article or website that I visited, or hey, here's something I tried that reduced stress in what I'm doing. And I think that ultimately, to your point, it carries over really to my third area beyond the acknowledge, educate. The third is that care. And I guess just a quick side note is, if you're not comfortable speaking this, then I know a lot of business owners who simply put it in an email and send it out. Maybe it's during Mental Health Month or Suicide Prevention Month or just any time of the year, and they'll just simply say they're acknowledging we're in a stressful situation. They're educating about the challenges. They're encouraging self-care. And I don't hear anybody that doesn't send that out, to your point about the standing ovation, that they don't get feedback and say, thank you for sending this. This was very valuable. And, we appreciate that you do care. But shifting over into the care component of the kind of the 3-letter framework is, ultimately, regardless of what resources we have or don't have, regardless of how much you think we're in a stressful situation, I want you, if you report to me, to know that you can always come to me and say, hey, the things are getting too stressful, or maybe I've got a situation at home that is really carrying over into my situation at work, or I realize that I've been, losing sleep, or I need to change some lifestyle behaviors, or whatever the case could be. But I want to be able to look at you in the eye and say, I understand, and you can always come in, and I care about you.
Right.
I will, as a leader, as a colleague, as an owner, I care about you, and let's do what we can to make the situation better. And if I can communicate that out into the ranks, into the other leaders, and build an organization, a culture that is key, then I've made a big step in terms of ingraining, building a culture that has strong mental health, strong wellness as part of that culture.
I think that's well said. I think many times people think that it's this complicated process, right? Like, and I've said to my team, and even used it this morning, just when you see a change maybe in behavior or difference in someone, just say, hey, I'm concerned. You seem maybe a little out of sorts or in a different position, right? Like whatever word they want to choose. And if they want to talk about it, you've at least created this opening and this kindness. And it's amazing on how many people, after trust is built, will then open up. But many times they feel really, they're like, well, what do you mean? Like you can recognize something different? Well, if we care about each other and we see the difference, well, why wouldn't I ask, right? You don't have to tell me, but many times others have also said, I think for others, just the impact of recognizing, even if somebody doesn't say it, still has a lot of impact, right? Others, and it'll take time, but I think it's very important to just recognize or to ask the simple question to someone. You never know what situation they're going to be in. I had an individual come to me and say, hey, I was not that we worked with, but I personally was talking to, and said, you don't realize you asking me that question, what changed my impact that day? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Right? No. And you really have no idea what impact you can have in others. I think it goes back to your purpose, right? Like what you're saying about purpose.
Right. And I think that, people say they hear that, my journey story, and they say, well, what did you learn from that? And I know that something that I'll say that I learned was to, be kind, because you have no idea as you go up or down or change what's going to, what comes around goes around, and those kinds of things. Right. I say, be kind. I say, be flexible, because you can plan all you want, but when things happen, when life throws you the curveball, you need to be prepared to handle it. And then it'll be, really to be proactive, or be someone who has a purpose. Because I think that was so, that's when people really get, are going to really struggle when they don't have that purpose. I think that to your point about the kindness, I'm looking here at a quote that I have on my screen, and it's a quote that I use in every presentation. It's by Plato, and it says, the highest form of knowledge is empathy. For it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. And I think about that, regularly, about how often again, not judging, because I'm not someone who would have been viewed as I was climbing my ladder as an empathetic person. But I believe that, I changed to some degree. My wife may say I could be a lot more EQ related, but I know my EQ versus IQ is much higher on the other side. Again, not saying it's over, but on the other side of some of these episodes that I have and that I had, and some of the challenges that I face. So I'm with you that there can be a lot of kindness shown, empathy, and things that don't get brought up in the typical business planning session for an MSP.
MSP, right? Yeah, I think hearing you say that, there's sometimes a lot of judgment, right? And as a leader, you're making a judgment or a statement without actually asking, right? And I'm not implying that happens all the time, but it's human nature, right? Like, and I think the more that we get to know ourselves, and the stronger we get to be, reflecting on, I can change myself, and then I can help someone else, right? That old age of like, hey, when we're on the airplane, first put your mask on, then help someone else. And that's not how I grew up, right? I grew up, help everyone else and then help yourself. Not a real great way to live your life from a self-care perspective. But I think then it goes back to kind of love, right? That care, take a loving approach, right? And if you look through the lens of love, then it changes kind of your body language, your feeling, right? And I think as a leader, as you grow as a leader and even a servant leader, the day that you can switch by saying, hey, I'm going to put myself in Scott's shoes or Andy's shoes or whomever it is, and be able to reflect there instead of myself, man, that really changes you, because it gives you a you're not perceiving the situation. You're kind of looking at the whole perspective. And when you were kind of talking about kind of marrying this up with, work, and then also the other work that you do in regards to like exit planning, right? You talk a lot about stress. So like exiting your business or even working in it's generally stressful, right? How do you see those that are working through kind of mental health and anxiety, how to manage through that, right?
Yeah, that's bigger than a bread box kind of topic, but I think that there are plenty of resources out there. There's 1,000 self-help books. There are probably 1,001 books on reducing stress. But I believe that, and clearly there are different types of stresses. In that book that I mentioned, Unstressable, they talk about, the analogy I give is we're all familiar what used to be Eisenhower's 4 quadrants for time management. Some people now call it Covey's quadrant, where you had important and not important, important and unimportant, urgent and not urgent, and you figured out where you were. And the reality is, if you were urgent and important, to some degree, that in a business setting, that might be the upcoming client meeting that's in 5 minutes. In a personal world, that might be, you lost a family member who died, right? That can be levels of important and urgent that you're dealing with, which in a stress world would be trauma, things that impact you externally. And using that same model, in the book, they bring it back to, again, a 4 quadrant model, but they bring it down to micro and macro stresses in terms of smaller and larger, and they bring it into the source of the stress being external or internal. So any stress that you have can really be boxed loosely into one of those 4 quadrants, with, external stress that is macro is trauma. Like I mentioned, if you have internal stress that is macro, a lot of times that is, referred to as an obsession. Where you hear people that have ruminations and can't stop thinking about something. That gets back to, if it's an obsession about the past, it's depression. If it's an obsession about the future and the challenges that can create, that can be anxiety, right? Professionals handle typically trauma and many times obsessions, anxiety and depression with medications or otherwise. So in the hours and time that I work with a lot of people, I'll just say, let's deal with external micro stressors, and we'll call those nuisances, right? We all have nuisances that come up. It's kind of like in the Covey model, right? When we talk about things that they may be important, but they're not urgent.
Right.
And likewise, if we have internal stressors that are small, I can refer to those, as the book does, in terms of noise. So how do we figure out how to reduce the nuisances and noise? So back to our stress equation, right? We reduce the sum of the challenges. So even if our ability to handle those doesn't change, we've reduced our stress in the stress equation. So there are all kinds of techniques to do that. One of the most common that I hear, and I'm big on, the acronyms as well. The book and others I've heard talk about the 3L model, where they'll speak about limits, they'll speak about learning, and they'll speak about listening. And in brief, limits are important because many times we find ourselves as business owners, as employees, as family members, not being able to draw boundaries. And boundaries can be very important. We find ourselves just simply the peanut butter gets spread too thin on the bread, and we can't do everything. I always see families and parents, their kids are in 5 different activities, they're driving everywhere, and then they're trying to do work, and it's just too much. So let's start, first of all, by putting some limits. Now, you may have to work with your manager to say, I can't do that N+1 ticket today without stressing me out. Have that conversation. The next part about learning can be owning the fact that you just simply need to learn more about what stress is, how it's caused. There's a stress equation, another one related to burnout. And burnout is a key factor. If you take that issue we talked about before, of the fact that we could burn ourselves out with high levels of noise, for example, that stress can be looked at as the challenge we face, the intensity of that challenge, the time it lasts, and the frequency that it happens. And instead of being addition, that's a multiplication equation, right? If we have that one ticket we don't like to accomplish as an engineer, and the intensity it creates is a level 9, not a level 3. We may not want to do it, but it's not a 3, it's a 9. And the intensity that it creates is super high as well. And the frequency we see it, there's a big difference between seeing that ticket once a day, once a month, once a quarter, right? You multiply that together, and if you continue to see that additive in a way that can create burnout, and that's another factor. But back to the 3 L's, establishing limits, learning more about stress in your life, and then the third L is listen. And it's listen mainly inwardly to you. You have to know when you are suffering, when you are experiencing, when you are in pain over these areas, because like we've talked about multiple times, in most cases, no one else is going to do that but you.
Right. I think it's a valid point when you say that too, in regards to also the ability with our days and hours, and stimulation is so high, right? We have social media, we have activity, we have noise, we have music. And, I think sometimes we overcomplicate just slow down, and we use the word meditate, but just even practicing quiet, right? Yes. Like I find just, how many times do we think and say, was there any quiet in my life that day other than when I sleep, right? And I'm still probably not quiet because things are running through my head. And I think even starting with one of those things of just sit in a room, be quiet, listen, really brings down a lot of that energy level, and potentially stress too. But if someone's listening to this right now, Scott, and they're like, man, like I can relate, but like I don't know what to do about it. Like, who do I talk to? How do I work through this? Do you have any feedback on that, or do you have any steps that might be helpful for them?
Yeah, I think that they can. They're welcome to contact me from the standpoint that I have a toolkit of resources. It's what I've shared at IT Nation Connect. It's what I shared with CompTIA. at the same time, they can go directly to the CompTIA website and look at the mental health resources. I'm always reluctant to say, here's a book, here's a website,
right.
just because you're really leaving it up to others. I would not hesitate at all to ask my team leader, my owner, hey, just educate me about, I don't feel like I need them today, but what resources do we have available in the event that this may happen? Could be for me, could be for a parent, could my spouse, could be for a child, whatever the case is, to understand. A lot of companies are subscribing to apps, like Headspace, where they can do this and totally anonymously. They can just connect with a coach, have somebody on the phone in 5 minutes and be talking to them, just to talk through something, to have somebody else to talk to. Maybe they have a good friend at work, or they're not comfortable at work, outside of work. I mean, I would seek out a human connection with somebody to have a conversation with whoever you may be comfortable to the degree of the challenge. Obviously, I usually put up a disclaimer slide at the start of my presentations. I'm not here as a medical professional. If you have a true challenge, you need to call 988. You need to go see a doctor. You need to get the right medication if needed. I can speak from experience that, I did not see the signs of my mother's taking her life. I'm not saying that they were, it's not like going in the old days where you'd go in and look at a router and there'd be red, yellow, green blinky lights. People are not like that. You have to slow down. You have to be willing to have that conversation. It can be in a one-on-one. In that one-on-one, again, you can acknowledge, educate, and care, and you'd be many times surprised. You may have to do it more than once, right? So I know I'm just kind of giving you a number of different scenarios, partially because I want the viewers to be able to choose what might be right for their individual situation. But hopefully they have somebody in their life, a manager, a mentor, a spouse, a friend, that they could have a conversation with, that they wouldn't feel stigmatized, and they could just, you hear always get it off your chest, or at least starting that conversation in a peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend scenario.
I think that's well said, and I think also too, there's a mix between, is this a medical area to address, or is this a therapy area to address? And I think it's relevant to your situation potentially. But I've identified with my life experiences that a lot of the hospitals don't as you work through these things, they're trained to solve medical issues. Your arm is broken, we're going to stabilize it. And there is a difference between that and if you're struggling with these areas, especially if you have some medical issues. I've experienced that with my father, and they can't seem to get it, right? I'm like, listen, this is more of an issue than this for the person's well-being. And I think we just encourage to look at all opportunities. If a door closes, open a door somewhere else potentially. As we wrap up a little bit, what would you give our listeners as kind of a wrap up to this conversation?
Well, I talk about, three main points often. One, obviously, is to work in your organization to build a culture in which it's okay to talk about mental health. And again, that can come from the acknowledge, educate, and care. That can talk about building it into your one-on-ones, your all hands meetings. That can come from talking about it in recruiting. You'd be surprised when you start talking about Gen Z, about how that can be an important topic as to what programs you have. Number two, I look at improving the wellness that you do have. And again, layering on top of any EAP program you have, but really wellness, not just we've got these check boxes checked, but what can you do in terms of bringing in resources? There was a day where we'd have lunch and learns, where we do virtual lunch and learns. Now you can do things to reduce stress. People have stress over money. How about having a financial advisor instead of just coming in to do a 401k update, do an Ask Me Anything session about what's happening financially? Same thing with an attorney. People are struggling to buy that first house or to deal with other legal issues. Should they have a will? How can you work with one of your attorney clients to come in and do simply an Ask Me Anything topic in that area? Most grocery store chains have a dietitian. Have them come in and talk about things that could be done to improve the wellness of what people are eating, educate them on the right things there. You might have that mental health first aid program where you'd sponsor a couple of people to go, or you'd have them come in and do a lunch and learn. You could watch a TEDx session or a TED Talk on the importance of sleep. All different things like that to level up your wellness. Make it part of your all-in calls. Make it, cheer on and celebrate people who have done the right things. Have a contest for, number of steps they can complete as spring comes around. There's just a lot of things that are wellness related. And lastly, I would encourage, the closing metaphor I will make here is many of us are old enough to remember the transition from reactive services to proactive services. And I leave everyone with the focus that what we're trying to do is to drive healthcare in general, specifically on this call, behavioral health, mental health, wellness, to more of a proactive service. So things that are proactive are building a plan, building a FAQ, talking to your leadership team about it, knowing that you want to do before you actually need it. And those are three key things that I think any of our leaders, owners, and employees and individual contributors can be part of.
Well, Scott, we appreciate you very much. And you're an amazing individual, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us. I think it will help many. And just like that, everyone, we reached the end of another Servant Leadership Library episode where we unpack mental health, leadership, and the fine art of keeping your sanity intact in the workplace. Huge thanks to Scott for bringing the real talk, right? The wisdom and the reminder that taking care of your mind isn't just a nice to have, it's a must have. Whether you're an IT pro struggling deadlines, or a leader navigating change, or just someone trying to keep it together one coffee at a time, remember, you're not alone, you're not broken, and there's always a way forward. If today's conversation sparks something in you, whether it's a new perspective or just a reminder to take that deep breath, don't keep it to yourself. Share the episode, start a conversation, and be the leader who makes a difference. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Paluco, reminding you that servant leadership starts with serving yourself too. Take care, stay well, and we'll catch you on the next episode.